There is a moment in every war when the abstraction of strategic competition, the language of missile counts and intercept ratios, and GDP loss calculations collapses into something immediate, human, and impossible to manage through press briefings and carefully worded official statements. That moment arrived in this conflict on the day an American F-15 fighter jet was shot down over Iranian territory. One crew member was recovered, and the second crew member was still missing somewhere inside the sovereign territory of a nation that the United States is simultaneously bombing, blockading, and negotiating with through Pakistani intermediaries. American search and rescue helicopters flew into Iranian airspace looking for that missing airman. Iranian tribesmen on the ground shot at those helicopters. Iranian military officials publicly offered financial rewards for anyone who successfully captured the missing American pilot and delivered him to Iranian authorities. And the United States military, operating the most powerful and technologically sophisticated armed force in the history of human civilization, was conducting a search and rescue mission for a single missing service member inside the territory of an adversary whose government was simultaneously offering money to its own citizens to find him first. That is not a strategic abstraction. That is the human face of what this war has become, stripped of every institutional narrative, every managed press release, and every carefully calibrated presidential statement designed to project confidence and control over a situation that the search for a missing American airman over Iranian territory communicates with brutal clarity, has moved beyond the boundaries of managed conflict into something more unpredictable, more dangerous, and more consequential than any public framing of this war has been designed to acknowledge. Tonight, this analysis will deliver the complete picture of what the shootdown of an American F-15 over Iran means operationally, what the search for a missing crew member inside Iranian territory reveals about the true state of this conflict, why Iran's simultaneous covert war inside Gulf state territory, exposed by the UAE's arrest of 27 Iranian-linked operatives planning systematic sabotage operations, represents a dimension of Iranian strategic action that has been almost entirely absent from the public analysis of this war, and what the combination of a missing American pilot, a collapsing presidential approval rating, India openly defying American sanctions to buy Iranian oil, and the petrodollar system showing its first visible cracks in 50 years means for the trajectory of a conflict that Washington entered with specific objectives and is managing with diminishing political freedom to pursue them. The shootdown of an American F-15 over Iranian territory is not simply a combat loss in the tactical accounting sense that military planners use to track aircraft attrition against mission objectives. It is a strategic event whose implications extend across three distinct dimensions that the brief official acknowledgement of the incident and the subsequent focus on the search and rescue operation have consistently prevented from receiving the analytical attention they require. The first dimension is operational. The F-15 Eagle is not a first-generation aircraft operating at the margins of American air power. It is the backbone of American tactical air superiority, a platform with an undefeated combat record across 5 decades of operational deployment, whose loss over Iranian territory to Iranian air defense systems means that whatever combination of Iranian surface-to-air missile capability, electronic warfare, and tactical adaptation produced that shootdown has demonstrated something about Iranian air defense capacity under the stress of sustained American bombing that the operational picture being presented to the American public has not incorporated. American B-2 stealth bombers have been flying missions over Iran from Diego Garcia since the opening night of this conflict. American F-35s have penetrated Iranian airspace. The air campaign has been presented as operating in an environment where Iranian air defense has been sufficiently degraded to allow American strike aircraft to conduct their missions with manageable risk. An F-15 shot down over Iranian territory updates that assessment in a direction that the institutional management of operational information has every incentive to minimize, and the families of every American crew member currently flying combat missions over Iran have every right to understand accurately. The second dimension is the crew. One crew member was recovered. The second was missing. American search and rescue helicopters flew into Iranian airspace in an active conflict zone to search for that crew member. An Iranian tribesman on the ground fired at those helicopters. The image that produces American military helicopters taking fire from Iranian civilians while searching for a missing airman inside the territory of a nation the United States is simultaneously negotiating a peace deal with, is one that no institutional communication strategy can fully contain once it reaches the American public with the clarity it deserves. Iranian military officials then announced publicly that they were offering financial rewards for anyone who captured the missing American pilot. The Iranian government, during an active ceasefire, during a period when Pakistani intermediaries are working around the clock to bring American and Iranian negotiators to the same table in Islamabad, publicly offered its citizens money to find and capture a missing American service member. The third dimension is what the combination of the shootdown, the rescue operation, and the capture reward communicates about the true operational environment that American military personnel are functioning in during this ceasefire. A ceasefire in which Iranian tribesmen shoot at American rescue helicopters and Iranian authorities offer bounties for missing American pilots is not a ceasefire in any operational sense that the word has carried in the history of American military engagement. It is a pause in the most visible forms of military action taking place within a conflict whose operational reality on the ground, in the air, and in the waterways continues to generate events whose human consequences cannot be managed through the diplomatic language of extended truces and unified proposals. The dimension of Iran's strategic campaign in this conflict that has received the least analytical attention proportional to its strategic significance is not the ballistic missile strikes that have been visible, documented, and counted in the thousands. It is the covert operational network that Iran has been running inside the Gulf states simultaneously, whose exposure by the UAE security services this week represents the most concrete public evidence yet that Iran's war against American interests and American allied stability in this region operates across multiple domains simultaneously and does not pause during ceasefires. The UAE State Security Department announced the arrest of 27 individuals suspected of belonging to an Iranian-linked terrorist organization that had been planning systematic terrorist and sabotage operations on UAE soil. The investigation revealed links between the organization and Iranian ideological and operational direction, with the network's activities described as aimed at undermining national unity, destabilizing the country, and preparing for coordinated sabotage operations against UAE infrastructure and institutions. 27 people arrested inside the UAE, one of America's closest Gulf partners, during an active ceasefire, while Iranian and American diplomats are discussing peace terms in Pakistan. The covert network whose exposure produced those 27 arrests was not assembled in response to this conflict. It was built over years of sustained Iranian intelligence and operational investment in Gulf state territory, patiently constructed across the same period during which Iran was developing the missile systems, the mine warfare capability, and the naval assets that constitute the visible dimensions of its military campaign. What the UAE arrests reveal is that Iran's strategic architecture in this conflict is not limited to the weapons systems that satellite imagery can track and military analysts can count. It includes a distributed human network inside the territory of American allies, positioned to conduct sabotage operations against civilian and military infrastructure at a moment of Iranian choosing, whose activation during a conflict whose visible military dimensions are temporarily paused by a ceasefire would produce consequences that the Gulf states' air defense systems, however capable against ballistic missiles and drones, are not designed to prevent. The 27 individuals arrested in the UAE are the portion of that network that UAE security services identified and neutralized. The question that the arrest announcement raises and does not answer is what portion of an Iranian covert network distributed across multiple Gulf states simultaneously was not identified, has not been arrested, and remains in place inside the territory of American allies during a ceasefire that Iranian military planners are using to rebuild missile infrastructure, reposition surviving assets, and signal escalatory options across every domain, from ballistic missiles to undersea internet cables to AI center threats. Iran is not fighting one war in this conflict. It is fighting four simultaneously. The visible missile and drone war that has dominated public coverage, the maritime war in the Strait of Hormuz that is costing the global economy $20 billion per day. The covert sabotage network war inside Gulf state territory that the UAE arrests have partially exposed, and the economic war against the petrodollar system, whose first visible cracks are appearing in the most consequential financial development of this conflict that has received the least attention it deserves. The financial and economic dimensions of this conflict have been covered primarily through the lens of oil price increases, global GDP losses, and the disruption to Gulf energy supply that the Strait of Hormuz closure has produced. What has not been covered with the analytical depth it requires is the structural shift in the global financial architecture that the war is accelerating in ways that will outlast the conflict itself, regardless of how the military and diplomatic dimensions are ultimately resolved. Iran is now pricing oil shipments in Chinese yuan, not as a pilot program, not as a theoretical alternative being studied in Tehran's economics ministry, as an operational reality whose existence has been confirmed by Iranian officials and whose significance is being amplified across Chinese social media platforms by influencers whose reach into Chinese public consciousness about the future of the global monetary system is producing a narrative whose strategic implications extend far beyond the immediate energy market disruption of a single conflict. On the Chinese platform Weibo, a video whose circulation reached millions of viewers declared that the petrodollar is ending and the Chinese renminbi has won this key round. That claim is premature as a description of the current monetary reality. It is not premature as a description of the direction that the structural incentives created by this conflict are pushing the global energy pricing system toward. The petrodollar arrangement, the agreement through which Gulf petroleum revenues have been recycled through American financial markets in dollar-denominated transactions since 1974, depends on the universal acceptance by petroleum-producing and consuming nations that dollar denomination is the stable, reliable, and politically neutral framework for global energy trade. A conflict in which the United States is simultaneously bombing Iran, blockading Iranian ports, seizing Iranian cargo ships, and threatening to destroy Iranian power plants and bridges, has demonstrated to every petroleum-producing and consuming nation watching this conflict that dollar-denominated energy trade operates within a political framework that the United States is willing to weaponize with extraordinary directness against adversaries whose compliance with American strategic preferences cannot be secured through other means. India's decision to openly import Iranian oil for the first time in 7 years, confirmed this week by India's own ministry in a statement described by Reuters as a rare official acknowledgement, is the most concrete expression of that lesson being drawn by a nation whose energy security interests and whose relationship with American sanctions enforcement have been fundamentally recalibrated by watching the Strait of Hormuz close and global energy prices surge to levels whose consequences for India's import-dependent economy have been severe and immediate. India bought Iranian oil. It bought Iranian liquefied petroleum gas. It discharged that cargo at the port of Mangalore. It told its own ministry, which told Reuters, which told the world. The Trump administration's response to this direct defiance of American sanctions by the world's most populous nation and one of America's most strategically important relationships in the Indo-Pacific has not been a secondary sanctions action, a diplomatic ultimatum, or any of the enforcement mechanisms that American sanctions architecture is designed to deploy against sanctions violators. The response has been silence, because the enforcement of secondary sanctions against India in the middle of a conflict whose management already requires the simultaneous attention of every American diplomatic and military resource available would produce consequences for the American strategic position in the Indo-Pacific that exceed the consequences of allowing India's sanctions defiance to proceed without public response. The 4 developments examined in this analysis: a missing American pilot over Iran, an Iranian covert network arrested inside the UAE, the petrodollar's first visible cracks, and India openly defying American sanctions, are not separate stories requiring individual news coverage. They are 4 simultaneous expressions of a single underlying strategic reality that the public framing of this conflict as a military campaign proceeding toward a negotiated resolution has consistently failed to communicate with the honesty that the cumulative weight of those 4 developments demands. The missing American pilot is the human expression of the gap between the operational narrative of American air dominance over Iran and the operational reality of an adversary whose air defense capability, despite 58 days of the most intensive American bombing campaign since the Second World War, retains sufficient lethality to shoot down an F-15 and offer bounties for its crew during a ceasefire. The Iranian covert network inside the UAE is the institutional expression of a strategic architecture whose depth and geographic distribution extends the conflict's operational footprint into the domestic territory of American allies in ways that no missile defense system and no naval blockade is designed to address. The petrodollar crack is the financial expression of a conflict whose economic consequences are accelerating structural changes in the global monetary system that decades of American financial diplomacy and institutional investment were specifically designed to prevent, and that 58 days of war in the Gulf are advancing with an efficiency that no Treasury Department statement or Federal Reserve intervention can reverse at the pace the structural incentives are moving. And India's sanctions defiance is the geopolitical expression of a world in which American enforcement capacity already stretched across the simultaneous management of a Gulf War, a Pacific competition with China, a European security commitment to NATO, and a domestic political environment where presidential approval has crashed to 37%, and two-thirds of Americans disapprove of the war's management, has reached the boundary beyond which the cost of enforcement exceeds the benefit of compliance, on the calculation of nations large enough to make that judgment without catastrophic consequence. Trump's approval on the economy stands at 32%. Two-thirds of Americans disapprove of his handling of the Iran war. The Senate has voted 5 times to restrict his war powers and failed each time by margins that are not expanding. The economic pressure of $4 gasoline, compounding daily against an American consumer economy whose political tolerance for sustained military engagement has historically proven finite, is the domestic political clock running against the administration's ability to maintain the current posture indefinitely, while Iran rebuilds its missiles underground and signals new cards on the battlefield. A missing American pilot somewhere inside Iranian territory. Iranian tribesmen firing at American rescue helicopters. Iranian officials offering bounties for his capture. 27 Iranian operatives arrested in the UAE during a ceasefire. Indian oil tankers discharging Iranian cargo at Mangalore in defiance of American sanctions. And Chinese social media declaring the petrodollar dead while Iranian oil is priced in yuan. This is the war that is actually happening across every domain simultaneously. In the space between the press briefings and the truce social posts and the extended ceasefire announcements and the unified proposal deadlines that the institutional management of this conflict has been designed to present as the full picture of what is occurring. The full picture is what you have just been given. Stay sharp. We will see you in the next one. Somewhere over Iranian territory, an American F-15 went down. Somewhere inside Iran, an American service member is either hiding, captured, or gone, while Iranian tribesmen fire at the helicopters searching for him, and Iranian officials count the reward money they will pay to whoever finds him first. In the UAE, 27 members of an Iranian covert network are in custody, while the rest of the network, the portion that was not found, remains in place across Gulf state territory during a ceasefire that Iranian military planners are using to rebuild every missile launcher that survived 58 days of American bombing. India is buying Iranian oil. China is pricing Iranian exports in yuan. The petrodollar is showing its first crack. Two-thirds of Americans disapprove of this war, and Iran's parliament speaker says new cards are coming. The war that was announced as a decisive campaign to destroy Iran's military capability and set the conditions for regime change has produced a missing pilot, a collapsing approval rating, a cracking financial system, and an adversary that is rebuilding underground, while simultaneously running covert networks inside Allied territory and defying American deterrence on every front it can reach. The next move belongs to Tehran. The dump trucks are still running. Stay sharp. We will see you in the next one.